You're listening to the Touchdown Under podcast with Jack, Emilian, Anthony, and Arif. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Touchdown Under podcast. I'm Jack, your host, and as always, I'm joined by Emilian.
Hey, how's it going?
Anthony.
Good to be here.
And Arif.
Happy to be back.
Now, today is episode 12 of the podcast, and today is part 2 of our State of the Franchise series. And today we have the NFC North and NFC South to go through today. But before we do that, we're going to kick it off with our news segment, as we always do. And the main news this week in the NFL was the player opt-out deadline, which was early Friday morning. Now, among the notable players to opt out since last week include Ravens wide receiver DeAnthony Thomas, Bills cornerback EJ Gaines, Broncos tackle Juwan James, Lions wide receiver Geronimo Allison, Chiefs offensive tackle Lucas Niang, Jaguars cornerback Rashaan Melvin, Dolphins wide receivers Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson, Patriots wide receiver Marquise Lee, Jets wide receiver Josh Doctson and linebacker CJ Mosley, 49ers wide receiver Travis Benjamin, and free agent Pro Bowl offensive guard Larry Warford. Emilian, which team is most affected by the player opt-outs?
For me, it's the Patriots. Easy. They've lost to Dante Hightower, as you said, Marquise Lee, I believe Marcus Cannon as well. I think their defense is going to suffer, especially without Hightower there. I think he's a great leader on that team. And, with their offense not being quite as good as it was last season, I don't know how they're going to do this season without a strong defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Patriots are the most affected. Obviously, Hightower, Chung, Lee, and Cannon are some pretty important names, and there'll be some pretty big losses for them this season. So it'll be interesting to see how they cope with those absences. I mean, it'll definitely have a negative impact on the defense, which was obviously deemed one of the best in the league last season. I also thought the Dolphins, have been also, pretty affected by the opt-outs, losing some of their key wide receiver depth in Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson. Arif, what do you reckon?
I agree. I feel like there's not much really behind Devontae Parker and Preston Williams now. I think as a whole, as a division, the AFC East has been affected pretty adversely to this point due to the opt-outs. I mean, they were already a weak division, and now there's some really big names not going to be there. As you mentioned, Emilian, Dante Hightower, also CJ Mosley. So there's a couple leaders there that won't be there on their teams in the 2020 season.
Now, that was the main news of the week, so that concludes our pretty brief news segment this week. So we're going to move straight into our State of the Franchise for the NFC North, and we're going to kick it off with the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, like last week, we've got 2 questions for each team, and we're going to be going around the 4 of us to see what we think about each question. Now, the first question we have for the Packers is, can they replicate their 13-3 campaign from last season, Anthony?
To start off, I think it's worth noting that the Packers finished 3rd in their division at the end of the 2018 season, which granted them a much easier schedule, which they had last year. On top of this, they had to play teams in the AFC West and NFC East, which really gave them an easy path to go 13-3. So I think putting all the players and the acquisitions and the losses over the offseason aside, I think it's important to note that the schedule they had in 2019 was much easier to go 13-3 compared to other teams that did so, like, the Saints.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, they really benefited from an easy schedule. And when a team like the Packers go 13-3 and you look at some of the wins they had, I mean, both games against the Lions were extremely close. And honestly, the Lions should have won one of them for sure. The Packers haven't improved on paper. I think that other great teams in the NFC have improved, and there's way too much competition for them to go 13-3.
I liked your point, Anthony, about the easy schedule Green Bay had in 2019. Another point about the Packers is I don't think that they can replicate their 13-3 year. I think it's similar to Matt Nagy's first season with the Bears. He had a lot of success there in his first year, but once teams started getting tape on him in his second year, they kind of had their own struggles, and so I feel like now that teams have tape on LaFleur, he's gonna have to introduce some new wrinkles in their offense to be able to kind of keep other teams on their toes. I also think there is that little bit of Rodgers losing faith in the coaching staff and the front office. He doesn't have a lot of wide receiver help. Obviously, Funchess opting out of the season doesn't help that fact. As we've documented pretty well, they did not go to the draft to help out Rodgers with many weapons, and so I feel like him losing faith in his own team might be a factor this season.
I agree with all the points you guys made. I also like to allude to the 2020 season and the Packers' schedule. I think there's no chance that they can go 13-3 when they have a stretch where they play teams like the Saints, the Buccaneers. Well, they have a stretch where they play the Saints, Bucs, Texans, Vikings, and then the 49ers. I think that it's too much of an ask for them to be able to go to 13-3, especially with the points that you guys just made.
On to our second question for the Packers, and that is, where do they stand in regards to the other top teams in the NFC?
I think they're significantly worse than the 49ers and Saints. I think they were the top teams in the NFC last year. The Packers, despite having one of the best quarterbacks in the game, I don't think they're at that elite level. Honestly, I think they're an above-average team, a good team. But I think if you say they're one of the top teams in the NFC, I think you're just holding them in too high of a regard. I think they're more on the level of the Eagles. I think 10-6, 11-5 at best.
Compared to the other top teams in the NFC, such as the Seahawks, the Niners, and the Saints, I think the Packers not drafting a receiver has to be the biggest hurdle for them to have to overcome to become, one of those top teams in the conference. Whilst Devontae Adams is definitely a top 5 receiver in my opinion, I think the Packers, they lack a lot of talent at wide receiver. They went out and got Devin Funchess in the offseason, which I don't think would have been that much of a benefit to their wide receiver core. But since he's opted out, he can't be of any use. And also with the young players that they have, such as Equanimeous St. Brown, Alan Lazard, and Marcus Valdez-Scantling, just too inexperienced to really boost the Packers receiver core by any means to compete with the other teams in the NFC.
I agree, Anthony. I don't think Funchess would have made that much of a difference. Obviously, he would have improved the receiving core slightly, but not really enough to elevate them, to one of the more premier receiving cores in the NFL. I feel like they're an above-average team in the NFC, and that's about it. I feel like teams like the Eagles, Seahawks, 49ers, Buccaneers, and Saints all have better prospects than the Packers, at least for this season. Now, we move on to the Minnesota Vikings, and our first question for them is, are they any closer to a Super Bowl? Anthony?
It's hard to say whether or not the Vikings are any closer to the Super Bowl, simply because there are many alterations to their roster, for better or for worse. On one hand, having Cousins win his first playoff game, last year really adds to his game going into the 2020 season. And along with a healthy Adam Thielen and first-round draft pick Justin Jefferson, the offense seems primed to improve in their 2019 campaign. However, the questions on the defense for the Vikings really lie with the departures of players such as Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Trey Waynes, and Xavier Rhodes, just to mention a few. All these losses just add to a collective loss of experience. And whether or not the defensive players, the Vikings drafted can replace these guys and can account for this loss of experience will be the biggest question mark in determining whether or not they're any closer to a Super Bowl or not. And in my opinion, I think at this stage, they're probably, they've taken a step back from that Super Bowl, appearance they might have had in a few seasons if they had kept their, really key defensive players. Just at the moment, I don't think they're any closer.
I agree with you, Anthony. I don't see them winning a Super Bowl anytime soon. I think their NFC Championship appearance in 2018 playoffs, I think that's as far as I'll go with Kirk Cousins now under center. I don't think he's the right guy to take them all the way back. As you said, the losses I think are just too great. They made the NFC Championship those years ago with one of the best defenses in the league. They no longer have that. They lost Stephon Diggs. Yeah. Kirk Cousins isn't the guy to lead them, in my opinion. So I don't think Vikings are close at all to a Super Bowl, especially with how competitive the NFC is.
Anthony, I agree with all of your points. There's a lot of off-season change, both on offense and defense, but especially on defense. And you're right, especially with your point about the loss of experience. I feel like it will take some time for their new replacements to come in and kind of gel and build chemistry together before I can confidently say that they're still moving in that direction towards a Super Bowl. And yeah, to Emilian's point, I agree. I don't think that Cousins has the ability to take them to a Super Bowl. He's serviceable. He can get you to the playoffs, maybe win you a game. I don't think he's the guy that's going to go and win it all. And so I don't think that they are closer to a Super Bowl. I feel like a better quarterback is going to be what's going to actually change that. Arif?
I agree. I think, especially with your guys' points about the loss of experience, especially on defense, it's a big thing, especially on that D line. They only have really one returning starter in Danielle Hunter. They've gotten a lot younger. I think they have a lot of talent there with the rookies that they drafted and gathered in free agency. Just to name a few, you got James Lynch from Baylor, Kenny Willekes, Troy Dye from Oregon, and then obviously their two new cornerbacks in Jeff Gladney and Cameron Dantzler. So they definitely have quite a bit of talent there, but it'll take a few years for them to get going.
I just want to add another point about the players that have departed. So Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Trey Waynes, and Xavier Rhodes, all combined, have 32 years of experience on that Vikings team. Everson Griffin's been there for 10 years. Linval Joseph's been there for 10 years. I think it's really underestimated how much experience they are losing out of just these few players leaving.
I agree again, Anthony. On to our second question for Minnesota, and that is, who is their most valuable player? And I think if it's strictly talking about value, I think Kirk Cousins is their most valuable player. However, we know that the interpretation of the MVP is a bit different to that. And I think if we're talking about the NFL's interpretation of value, Dalvin Cook is the Vikings MVP. I feel like he's their best player. And I think once most teams, kind of figure out Cousins, it's really on him to kind of, lead that running game and kind of, be that second option on offense for the Vikings.
Yeah, I like your point. When the interpretation of most valuable player comes into play, I do think it's Dalvin Cook still, simply because, the Vikings are a run-first team, and Dalvin Cook is one of the best running backs in the league. Kirk Cousins, while he is a good quarterback, he's not really valuable in my opinion. I think it shows that the Vikings went so far with Case Keenum as their quarterback. I think Kirk Cousins doesn't add that much to the team. I think that Dalvin Cook brings a lot more than he does.
Yeah, as much as Kirk Cousins, isn't a superb quarterback by any means, he is, he's their most valuable player because, if he goes down, they're done. Like, I'm not backing on a guy like Sean Mannion to come in and, take the reins. And, to me, it doesn't matter if they're a run-first team because, you still need a guy throwing the football, and Dalvin Cook isn't going to be able to, take a team led by a backup like Mannion, back to the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm going to make a point a bit different to what you guys have made so far. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. I think obviously Dalvin Cook, it seems like the most, valuable player on paper, but I think, especially since the Vikings, defense has their biggest question mark on whether the team can perform in 2020. For me, I think Danielle Hunter is probably the most valuable to the team overall. Having lost Everson Griffin and Linval Joseph, lethal pass rushers and really, formed the base of that defense over the last couple of years. Hunter becomes one of the more experienced players on the defense, automatically having them gone. And with 14.5 sacks in both 2018 and 2019, he certainly has a talent too. I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
I completely agree, Anthony. Honestly, I liked your point as well, Jack, about Cook, but really Danielle Hunter is the only real proven player on that defensive line now. I think he's going to have to, he's had those 14.5 sack seasons, as you mentioned, Anthony, but not only is he going to have to reproduce that, he's going to have to step up into the shoes of Everson Griffin in that kind of leadership role and mentor some of the rookies. And I think that will really show us whether he is their most valuable player rather than just his statistics.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up there, Anthony, about Hunter. I was going to say, after Cook, in terms of honorable mentions, I feel like Daniel Hunter and Adam Thielen are, just kind of behind Cook as the next, two best candidates for MVP on the Vikings. I'm going to move now to the Chicago Bears, and the first question for them is, can the defense get back to its 2018 form? I feel like they can, based on the offseason additions made on defense. You've got Tayshaun Gibson to replace Clinton Dix at strong safety. They drafted a really promising cornerback in Jalen Johnson out of Utah to replace the departing Prince Amukamara. Robert Quinn is a massive upgrade from Leonard Floyd. And, having a better complementary pass rushing teammate in Quinn is hugely beneficial for a guy like Khalil Mack, who consistently draws double teams from opponents.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they definitely can get back to the 2018 form, and I think the reason for that is because all the key players from that season are still there. Khalil Mack, Eddie Jackson, Kyle Fuller, etc. And whether or not they lost some players, as you mentioned, Jack, they lost Prince Amukamara, they lost Clinton Dix. They replaced them, and in some ways, they actually upgraded at that position. So I agree. I don't see why the defense can't get back to that form. The only question mark I have is the departure of Vic Fangio last season will it have more of an impact on the team in the next few years than we originally thought?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Million. I think another point I was going to bring up about whether or not they can get back to their 2018 form, I think it kind of there's some responsibility on, the quarterback performance and the performance of the offense on whether or not the defense get back to that level. Because obviously, you don't have to make much about football to know that if your defense is on the field for a long amount of time, they can't perform as well as if they had extended breaks. So I think if Trubisky can perform well, having like someone like Nick Foles right there to potentially take over if he slips up could put pressure on him to perform and it could boost the production of the defense having less time spent on the field.
I agree with that point. I like that point, Anthony. I feel like fatigue does really come into the equation as, those games go on. There were a few games last season, like against the Eagles, where, they just had consistent three and out after three and out after three and out. And it really took a toll on the defense because, as elite as the Bears defense is, they can only, take so much. They can only stay on the field so long before they start, getting tired. I feel like that definitely factors in. Yeah.
I feel like Robert Quinn is exactly what this team needs to get that Bears defense back to that level. I liked your point about, maybe it would be better if there was a distraction on the other side for Max so he doesn't constantly get double teamed. Something like what happened with Aaron Donald at the Rams. He started getting triple teamed when they didn't have that threat on the other side. So I feel like with Quinn now here, who produced pretty well in Dallas last season, I reckon this really opens up the defensive line for Khalil Mack to get back to his best.
Yeah, that's a good point you make there, Riff. Khalil Mack did have his season with double teams, and I think that had a lot to do with Leonard Floyd, who was opposite him, who really wasn't able to produce enough, to kind of take some of the burden off of Mack. And I feel like Robert Quinn is a definite upgrade over Floyd and will be able to take some of that pressure off Mack when he is eventually double-teamed and sometimes triple-teamed. On to our second question for the Bears, and that is this a make-or-break year for head coach Matt Nagy?
I don't think so. I think 3 years is too soon for a head coach to be axed if they don't perform well. And even though he was, quite bad last season because of the play call and all that, in his first year as head coach for the Bears, he won Coach of the Year for a reason. I mean, that Bears team was quite good. They went 12-4, best defense in the league, and their defense looks promising again this season. As we just mentioned, they can get back to that form. So I don't think this is a make or break year for Matt Nagy. I think it's more make or break year for management to really do something about that offense if it doesn't change much anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree with you, Million. So they went 8-8, in 2019. I think based off that performance and, obviously wanting to improve off that, I feel like realistically, a 10-6 record or something, around that would be, if Matt Nagy was to take a step back and regress on that 8-8 record, I feel like his job would be on the line. But if he was able to get 10-6 and maybe compete for that wild card spot, especially since there's a third wild card spot in the conference up for grabs this year, I think that's a realistic expectation for Bears fans to have in terms of whether or not he should remain as a coach in the future.
Yeah, I agree, Anthony. To your point, Emilian, as much as if he did have a good season this season, he might not get fired, I feel like Chicago is a very critical fan base, and I feel like if there is another below par season this year, I feel like fans will start to kind of push the envelope and start to kind of talk about the possibility of hiring a new head coach. But personally, I feel like if they go 8-8 or worse this year, there is every chance he could get the boot at the end of the year. I don't think, though, that'll happen because I feel like Chicago will improve massively after a disappointing 2019 campaign. Arif?
I have a question for you, Jack.
Yep.
Do you think if the Bears perform to a similar level that they did in 2019, and let's say Matt Nagy, he didn't have those kind of bad play calling issues or anything, it was more on the offensive and defensive coordinators, do you think the Bears look to replace some of their other stuff rather than just blaming it on the head coach?
Well, Arif, Chicago went and brought in a new offensive coordinator this year, at the beginning of this year, as well as a new run game coordinator. So I feel like they did make some changes. They had a look at last year and they did make some changes. But I feel like Matt Nagy does shoulder most of the responsibility for their struggles, especially on the offense last season, because he is the play caller at the end of the day. And as bad as Trubisky was, the blame does also go to Nagy because he has got to play call to his quarterback's strengths. And I feel like he called a few too many of those cute plays, and Trubisky wasn't able to really work it out as well as he did in 2018. And so I feel like it was a lot on Nagy, but there were definite issues with the run game and the offensive line. So changes had to be made, and they did make those changes. So I'll be interested to see how those changes pan out this year. On to the Detroit Lions, and our first question for them is, how close is this team to playoff contention, Emilian?
I think the NFC North as a whole is quite weak. I don't think this season we're going to be seeing a team that has, higher than a 12-4 record. Last year we had the Packers at 13-3. Year before we had the Bears at 12-4, and the year before that Vikings at 13-3. So I think the Lions can definitely contend for the playoffs if they're healthy. I think that offense has a lot of talent. For me, it's just a defense that holds them back quite a bit because there is just not much talent there.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you. I want to make a point about, they lost Darius Slay in the offseason. And I think, as you mentioned about that defense, being particularly bad compared to the rest of the division, I think losing Darius Slay is such a massive loss to an already depleted defense.
That's a good point you make there, Anthony. I was just going to make that same point about Slay. I feel like he was a really big off-season loss, and I still think this team is a fair way away from playoff contention. They also lost Geronimo Allison just even before the season started to the COVID-19 opt-out, so that's also a pretty big loss to their offense. But yeah, I still feel like they're a fair ways away. There are a few too many holes on that defense. Their run game is a bit iffy. Yeah, I still think they're a couple seasons away.
I agree with your point, Jack. I feel like there's a lot of question marks on this Lions team, especially with the return of Stafford after all his injuries. If he can get back to that form, I feel like in the next 2-3 years, it's more realistic for them to make a playoff push. They drafted a bunch of promising rookies. And also, we also have to think about, as we've mentioned in previous podcasts, that 7th wildcard spot. And I feel like this season, there's too many other good teams, especially in the NFC South and West, that could be taking that spot. But the Lions can probably push for that in 2021 or 22.
I agree. I think when you look at, how far away they are, I don't think it's this season at all. I think, as you said, Jack, a couple of seasons. But the Lions do have a pretty young roster. Stafford obviously is in his 30s, but when you've got Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, and Kenny Golladay all on that offense, there's a lot of promise there. And you look at the other teams in the NFC North, I think the Lions' best chance of getting to the playoffs is actually winning the division rather than a wildcard spot because of the amount of strong teams in other divisions in the NFC. So you look at the other teams in the NFC North, you see the Packers, they're having problems. The Bears offense is having problems, and the Vikings as a whole are having problems. I think that, winning the division is the way to go for the Lions in the next few years.
I agree with you guys. I think the time is now for the Lions. I don't think it happens, but I feel like now is the right time for them, to make a playoff push. They've got one of the best wide receivers in the league in Golladay, and I think it's on Stafford. He's got to stay healthy, and he's got to really lift this team because it's going to be the offense that does it for him. It won't be the defense. It's got to be Stafford and that offense that's going to do it for them. I don't see it happening, but I think this is the year. It's this year or next. It's got to be soon because eventually Stafford's time is going to start running out. On to our next question for Detroit, and that is, how long does Matt Patricia have left, Anthony?
Yeah, so I think with all the points we made about the last question, it kind of ties into, how long Matt Patricia has and based off how he can get the Lions to perform. I think given that the roster is young and they're coming off, a season where they went, had only 3 wins, 12 losses and one tie, I reckon 2 seasons is a decent amount of time to get that team together, to get some experience into the young players, to maybe go to the draft or trade for some players if they need to. I think having a winning record by those 2 seasons would be enough for him to keep his job by that stage.
I just want to add to your point, Anthony. I do agree that, he hasn't had much time, but he's really not in the easiest position for a head coach to be with the Lions, always battling, injury issues, having relatively a weak team in the past few years. I don't think he has much longer left, though, because he just hasn't really done much at all, despite, not having much to do.
I completely agree with your point, Anthony. I think it's completely unrealistic with the roster he has now to work with to say after this season, if he has a season below, 8 wins, for example, I think it's completely unfair on him if they fire him. He doesn't have much to work with. In saying that, if after the next season or 2 he doesn't get them to a winning record or the playoffs, I think that's when they really start to put his job in jeopardy.
I kind of disagree with you guys. I feel like even though Matt Patricia wasn't given the greatest roster, he hasn't really done much in free agency or in the draft to kind of, make a really, quick improvement for the Lions. He obviously he wasn't given much, but he's not done a lot either. And I feel like there's a decent chance he gets shown the door if the Lions produce another losing season in 2020.
Jack, do you think that below 8 wins is more harsh? I think that if he reproduces another season like they did, I think 5 wins max. I think by then, if he only manages that, I think that's where he gets shown the door. But I think if they get 6 or 7 wins, I think that's still a pretty good effort for the Lions.
I feel like with a healthy Stafford and a healthy Golladay, and if the running game improves, I feel like 7 wins just isn't really enough to justify that offense. He's had 3 seasons now, and he's done literally nothing in those seasons. Well, it'll be his 3rd season this year, but up to now he's done 0. And if he gets a losing season again and no playoffs, I feel like there's an outside chance he comes back in 2021. That wraps up our state of the franchise for the 4 NFC North teams, and we're going to move on to the NFC South and kick it off with the New Orleans Saints. And the first question we have for them is their Super Bowl window closing, Arif?
I feel like their Super Bowl window isn't closing, and my reasoning for that is they have one of the best secondaries in the league now after adding Malcolm Jenkins and earlier in this last season, Janoris Jenkins. I feel like the reason that their Super Bowl window could be closing is, has Drew Brees got enough arm talent to get them back to the playoffs? And I think that's a massive question mark on their team, considering that we can all see his arm strength steadily declining. And will Jameis Winston be the guy after him? And if he's not able to be the guy, then they're going to have some issues going into the future.
I do worry about New Orleans' ability to show up in the big moments. Their playoff run in 2018 was cut short in an NFC Championship game, and they're a massive letdown in the playoffs last season, falling short in the wild card round. if they don't reach the Super Bowl this season, I'll be pretty concerned about their window closing, Anthony.
Yeah, I honestly think, especially since the Saints went out and got Emmanuel Sanders, and they still have Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, and they still have that brilliant defense. I think whilst there is a fair case to say that Drew Brees aging is contributing a decent amount to how much the offense can operate in terms of being that aerial threat that they like a few seasons ago they were much more dangerous by the air than they are now compared since Drew Brees is aging it. But I think there's just too much weapons on the offense to say that they're declining by any means. I think the Super Bowl window is still open. I don't know. I feel like with Emmanuel Sanders, they should look at the boost and their offense and go further into the playoffs than they did last year.
I think their Super Bowl window is still open, and the reason I say that is, as you said, Anthony, they've got a ton of talent on the offense, enough to keep Brees going. And even after that, I think that a backup quarterback, whether that be a rookie that they draft in the next few years, who learns on the bench while Brees is still playing his final few years, I think that Teddy Bridgewater showed last season that you don't have to be a great quarterback to do well in the Saints system. Teddy Bridgewater went undefeated in the 5 games he played for the Saints, so I'm pretty sure that the Saints are gonna have a Super Bowl opportunity. As you said, Jack, though, they haven't been able to come up big when it matters in the playoffs. I think they've been quite underwhelming in the past 2 years when it comes to the playoffs. So we'll have to see going forward, will they be able to finally, face their demons and actually make it to the Super Bowl?
On to our second question for the Saints, that is, how long does Drew Brees have left, Anthony?
I think this Drew Brees, is obviously aging. He's 41 years old. I think this can be compared to Tom Brady in New England. Obviously, they kind of, molded that offense around him aging and not being able to throw as long as he used to. I think the Saints are doing that at the moment with Drew Brees. Michael Thomas has been, criticized for not running as deep routes. He's more the shorter route options. And I think that's because of Drew Brees' aging. And I think also, I don't know if you remember in the playoffs against the Vikings, how it was I think just before halftime, Taysom Hill threw that massive bomb down, and it got caught on like the 3-yard line. And that was like, Taysom Hill came in to do that. Like, Drew Brees couldn't have done that, especially considering how old he is. I think the Saints are at the moment currently, adjusting to Drew Brees aging. And I think you'd probably safe to say he has 3 seasons left, if I was to put a numerical answer to that.
Yeah, I feel like he's probably got about 2 years maximum left in him. If they win it all this year, though, I think he might retire before 2021. And I think if he chooses to retire at the end of this year, I feel like Jameis Winston will have a very good shot at taking over that starting role in New Orleans. He does have the arm talent that Drew Brees doesn't, and I feel like that signing is pretty underrated. I think it's actually pretty significant the more I thought about it, I think he will get his chance to start for the Saints once Drew Brees' time is up.
It'll be interesting to see what the Saints do regarding quarterback. I know, Jack, as you mentioned, Jameis Winston could very well be the guy for them once Drew Brees is gone. But do you guys think that they should maybe consider drafting a rookie quarterback in the next few years, maybe to learn under Drew Brees for a year or two so that, they can have a more reliable option than Jameis Winston?
I honestly don't think so, because they already have Taysom Hill. And I know you said apart from Jameis Winston, but they already have 3 quarterbacks at the moment. If Drew Brees goes, they have 2. So it's not something in the long term they really have to consider for a while.
I don't think you can bank on Taysom Hill being like a full-time quarterback. I feel like his role is perfect as a guy who can come in every now and again, maybe on 4th down, throw a pass. I don't think you can bank on him as a full-time quarterback. And I do agree with your point a million. I feel like they definitely should, in next year's draft, look at drafting a quarterback to learn under Brees, maybe take a back seat to Winston perhaps, or he might beat out Winston. But I feel like you could create a quarterback battle between Winston and a potential draft pick once Brees' time is up. Arif?
I don't think that the Saints will go out next season, for example, and go draft a quarterback. I think their quarterback room is quite good as it is. I think they have one of those wildcat quarterbacks that are proving so valuable. They pretty much define the position, and that's Taysom Hill. They went out and got Jameis Winston in the offseason. They have Brees, who will play until he's not able to play. That's the kind of trust that they have in him. And they also went out and drafted a quarterback in the draft. So I think I don't think they're going to go out and get one next season.
On we move now to the Atlanta Falcons, and our first question for them is their Super Bowl window still open, Arif?
I don't think that it is still open. I feel like they got a team where a couple of key position players haven't really played together. I mean, their cornerback situation is a bit confused at the moment. They have a couple of young guys that haven't played together. They also have Todd Gurley, who's new to the system. So it'll be interesting to see, but I don't think the Super Bowl window is still open.
Yeah, I don't think their Super Bowl window is still open, and that's primarily because of the rest of the division, mainly the Buccaneers and the Saints. It's just going to be too hard to compete with for the division. And whilst that third wildcard spot is definitely achievable, especially with additions to teams such as AJ Terrell on the defense, I believe you can't say a team's Super Bowl window is still open if they're aiming for that wildcard spot. Obviously the Titans proved us wrong making it to the AFC Championship game last season and nearly getting to the Super Bowl. But I think the Falcons, they aren't the team that they were when they reached the Super Bowl a couple of seasons ago. And, for the time being, it's closed, in my opinion.
I disagree with your point about a team that aims for a wild card spot not being able to go to the Super Bowl. I mean, we've had the Giants in 2011 who won the Super Bowl as the number 6 seed. We had the Packers who won Super Bowl 45 as the number 6 seed. I think if the Falcons can get into the playoffs, I do believe they can get into the Super Bowl. And I think the Super Bowl window is open, but ever so slightly, mainly because Matt Ryan and Julio Jones are still playing at a very high level. They still got Deion Jones, and their roster, their team was quite good in the second half of last season. They went 6-2, I believe, in the second half. And honestly, that just shows a lot of promise for this season. I think the Falcons are definitely an underrated team going into the season.
Anthony, you made a point about the Falcons aiming for a wild card spot, and I mean, you kind of followed up on it. I don't feel like any team goes into the season thinking, "Oh, let's aim for a wild card spot." Every single team wants to go for the Super Bowl, and so I don't think any team just goes in and just aims just for a wild card spot. Every single team wants to go all the way. Now, I think if the window for them is open, it's open by a sliver. They have to make the playoffs this year at least. Otherwise, it's shut for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I might have phrased that wrong. I think it's just too hard for them to go out and expect to win a division, considering they got the Buccaneers who are expected to do so much in the season. You still have the Saints there. I think whilst you wouldn't say that they're aiming for him, I don't think they're really. I wouldn't get your hopes up on them winning the division, especially with the talent through the Saints and the Buccaneers they have to compete with in that division.
On to our next question for the Falcons, and that is, can the offense produce as well as the roster suggests? I feel like it hasn't really lived up to expectations the last couple of seasons, so I doubt that it will this season, but I'm hoping the insertion of Todd Gurley into the offense can kind of rejuvenate the team.
I agree. They have been on the decline since Matt Ryan won the MVP award, but I think having the best receiver in the league, in my opinion, in Julio Jones, I think the addition of Todd Gurley, yes, he's not, that top tier running back anymore. I still think he can add something. He can bring something to the team that Devontae Freeman just didn't in the past few years. So I think on paper the roster is the offense is quite good, and Calvin Ridley's going to improve. I think that they definitely can live up to those expectations.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just think, honestly, just with Todd Gurley, they obviously went and got him in the offseason from the Rams. I just think it's just too much. It's just too much to rely on someone who has quite significant, complications with his knee. I think if he isn't able to stay healthy, that run game is almost nearly abolished. And I feel like on paper, obviously Julio is definitely that go-to duo with Matt Ryan. But I think with that run game, a lot of doubts about if he can stay healthy. I just don't know that this roster is as good as it seems.
Anthony, I don't feel like anyone at the Falcons is going to be relying on Todd Gurley in an offense. I think he's going to be that guy who can take the pressure off Ryan and Jones if need be. He definitely won't be, a feature, like a strong, feature of that offense. He'll be a guy that can come in every now and again and, hopefully make a few splash plays. But I don't think anyone's going to be relying on him to, go back to his MVP contention year a few years ago. Arif?
I think they have one of the best trios in the league, and also Calvin Ridley at wide receiver. I think the only issue with their offense is if one of those main players goes down. I don't think they have a lot of depth in their team, especially in their receiving core. And at tight end, a big question mark will be whether Hayden Hurst can live up to his first-round pick status.
On to move now to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and our first question for them is, should we buy into the hype of the 2020 Buccaneers?
Absolutely. I don't see why not. Jameis Winston led the league in passing yards last season for a reason, and that's because he had so many great weapons around him. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, arguably the best receiving duo in the league. And now that they've added Rob Gronkowski, who I think is still going to be a great tight end, maybe not the best in the league, but I still think he's going to be great. And having, Brady there, we know how good Brady is. We know how good he can be, especially with Gronkowski. The run defense was best in the league last year. And honestly, I think it just relies on the pass defense. If they can, not hold the team back as much as they did last year, I think the Bucs are definitely one of the best teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I recall a few episodes ago talking about comparing, the hype to the Buccaneers this season as we had for the Browns last season. I think the only difference here is that we know what we're going to get from Tom Brady, as opposed to we didn't know what we're going to get from Baker Mayfield heading into last season. That being said, there's no massive question marks here on whether or not this team can perform, because like you said, Emilian, they've showed last year with how Jameis Winston performed in their team that they have what it takes to be a good team, and with experience and a reliable quarterback in Tom Brady, there's just, they'll be able to take that next step to, making the playoffs.
I think we should buy into the hype of the Buccaneers. Obviously, we won't know how good they really are until they actually get into the field in week 1, but I feel like there's too much to like to say that they won't live up to the hype.
I completely agree with that point. I think this roster is way too talented to have a down season as the Browns did in the past 2 seasons after their little hype train episode.
On to the second Buccaneers question, and that is Tom Brady the right quarterback to lead this franchise? I think at this point in the year, we're all guessing, but I'd say his experience is exactly what these younger Tampa Bay players need to start playing winning football, and obviously having Gronkowski by his side doesn't hurt either. Anthony?
I think Tom Brady is the right person to lead the franchise in the short term. But however, in the long term, I don't think he is that reliable, quarterback to lead the franchise. Just because he's 43 years old entering the season, he can't be around for much longer, no matter how how consistently he plays. Because questions to whether or not he can stay healthy as he gets older will rise, as he gets into his mid to late 40s. But I think at the moment, in the short term, it is fair to say that he will boost the team, and he's the right option.
Obviously, in the long term, he's not a good option because obviously of his age. He's going to retire in the next 3 years. I think Jack hit it perfectly. He's perfect choice so that he can actually lead the younger, more inexperienced players on that Buccaneers team. I think he can definitely lead them for the next 3 or 4 years. I think he can lead them to being one of the best teams in the league. And Brady, regarding his performance on the Bucs last season, what he was missing were reliable targets, and he's got an abundance of them now. So absolutely, it's right choice to lead this franchise in the short term.
Did you say he could lead for the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, I mean 3 or 4 years if he keeps playing. I think as long as he keeps playing, he's the right guy for them to be one of the best teams in the league.
Do you think he'll last 4 years?
No, I don't think 4 years. If he leads 4 years, if he still has 4 years left, I think by the end he's going to look like Peyton Manning did at the end of his career. So let me rephrase my thing. As long as he's still playing, at the expected level, he's definitely the right guy to lead this franchise.
I feel like the kind of character that Tom Brady shows, I feel like if he doesn't achieve this kind of success with the Bucs, maybe getting to a Super Bowl and winning it, I don't think he's going to go out until he achieves that success just based on his demeanor and stuff. But definitely, as you mentioned, Anthony, short term, he is the viable option here at quarterback.
On to move now to the final team of our State of the Franchise episode, and that is the Carolina Panthers. And our first question for them is, are the Panthers closer to rebuilding or contending for a playoff spot? And I think they're closer to rebuilding, but I don't think their roster is that bad or as bad as people suggest. It might take new head coach Matt Rule a few seasons to get his franchise back on track, however. Anthony?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. For me, I believe that the Panthers are certainly close to rebuilding. With additions, such as Robbie Anderson, Teddy Bridgewater, their offense is certainly nowhere near the level of explosiveness that the Bucs, the Saints, and even the Falcons currently have. making competing for a playoff spot in the NFC South a significant challenge to a team that finished 5-11. Also on defense, the Panthers drafted solely defensive players, with the 7 draft picks that they had in the draft. So they certainly are rebuilding.
I agree with you guys. I think rebuilding is definitely the way they should go right now, and I think they are. I think, they don't have a very explosive offense. They don't have a massive player. Obviously, apart from McCaffrey. McCaffrey is their best player. He's the best running back in the league. And I think it's going to take a while for them to build a team around him on both sides of the ball as well. On defense, they've got a long ways to go now that Kuechly's gone. And Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion, is more of a placeholder QB until they find something better.
I completely agree with those 2 points, Emilian. I feel like there's a lot of potential in the coming drafts, especially the 2021 draft, for the Panthers to find a quarterback. Because of their complete focus in the 2020 draft on defense, I feel like in the future that's going to leave quite a few gaps on the offense that need to be filled during the draft.
On to our second question for the Panthers, and that is, how much does Teddy Bridgewater improve his team, Emilian?
I don't think he improves it much at all, to be honest. I think the offense is still going to run through McCaffrey. That being said, Teddy Bridgewater is definitely a much better quarterback than Kyle Allen, and he's got good weapons in DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and Robbie Anderson. But I think the team needs much more than him to improve drastically.
I agree. He's certainly an upgrader from Kyle Allen. I'm not sure yet whether he's an upgrade from Cam Newton. We'll have to wait and see for that one. However, I like the signing for Carolina. I'm hoping he'll be able to build some chemistry with Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, and DJ Moore in Charlotte. Ruth?
I agree with both your points. I feel like he's a completely better player than Kyle Allen. However, the play style that Carolina run, I don't feel like he's going to have any real game-changing impact. It's still going to be focused around Christian McCaffrey.
I've got a question for you guys. Do you guys think that Teddy Bridgewater played so well in the Saints because of the team he had around him? I mean, he had Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas. He had a great offensive line. Do you think we should expect the same production from him on a worse offense in Carolina?
That's a good question, Emilian. I feel like Bridgewater did do some nice things in Minnesota before he was injured, and I do remember that roster. It was significantly it was worse than the Saints roster he played with last season. So I feel like he does have the ability to play well when his teammates maybe aren't superstars, but obviously the pretty elite roster in New Orleans definitely did help him last season. Arif?
I feel like a main important thing is the offensive line. He had a pretty good offensive line back in Minnesota and definitely an elite one in New Orleans. So if the Panthers' offensive line can hold up for him, I think that will go a long ways to him showing the kind of things he did in his previous teams.
I agree, Riff. Now that wraps up our State of the Franchise for the NFC South and NFC North this week on episode 12. Make sure you tune in for the third of 4 episodes next week in episode 13, where we go over our AFC East and AFC West State of the Franchise series. If you haven't already followed us on Instagram, please do so. That is at touch.down.under. That's where you can find all of our podcast content, as well as content that we don't go over in the podcast. It's great stuff. Make sure you give it a look. We're also on Twitter at the TDU Podcast, and we premiere our podcasts on Facebook and YouTube at TouchDownUnder. Thank you guys for listening once again, and we will see you next week.